So I'm out at the courthouse, and the trial related to the divorce attorney that put his client into private judging is in trial, and they're about to call a jury in. But I'm going to explain what goes on in a trial when you sue an attorney, because that doesn't happen very often. And so I'm going to use this live chat, and I'm also going to use videos. And this week we're going to talk all about private judging. And we have our trusty 16-year-old dog on the job here today. I'm going to wait and see for people to come in. I did not title this video because I just wanted to get people in, and I'm going to just start talking about this case. So this is a case against divorce attorney. Hi, John Denicola. Can you hear me okay? I just want to make sure. Yeah, we're getting a private judge party started, and I'm going to explain what's going on in the courthouse. And I'm going to explain what it takes to sue an attorney who puts you into private judging. And I'm going to turn the camera around in a little bit, but I just wanted you to see that this is where I am. I'm going to explain the layout of everything. So this case started initially in that courthouse behind me, the family courthouse, involving a divorce case, for a second divorce case for both Richard Garcia and Mary Lopez. And if you go back through some of my old videos, you'll see me chasing Mary Lopez from here after one of the hearings, asking her about some cash and gold coins, because in their divorce case, Richard alleged that she had taken cash and gold coins out of a safe with her first husband to keep the cash and gold coins separate and concealed from her first husband's siblings, who were the rightful heirs to their rich uncle in Almaden Valley. And so also I'm standing here on this sidewalk because if you watch my videos, you know that the attorneys and judges in this courthouse have made local rules and orders that prevent me, and they only enforce it on me, they don't enforce it on any other reporters, from recording anywhere on court property. So you can see I'm showing you the line. I've got Puppy in the background. She just turned 16 on Sunday, and she's still working. So we're gonna stay on the sidewalk outside the courthouse. And when I arrived today, I happened to catch the attorneys, and one of them is Brad Benning. And I got him on video, and I followed him down the block talking about the motion he had just won. So I'm going to post videos about this later, but I want to explain how we got here, because it's been 5 years to get a divorce attorney to a malpractice trial in front of a jury. So remember, this started, and it was a case in that courthouse in 2016, and now it is in this courthouse, which is the civil courthouse, and a jury is going to hear this case. So it took 5 years to be able to sue a divorce attorney and have them answering to a jury. And the case is for malpractice. It's also for fraud. He is claiming that his attorney committed fraud when he got him into private judging with Michael Smith, and the attorneys who were opposing and representing the wife were David Patton of the Lonich and Patton law firm. And so this is a little incestuous club, and we always talk about that. We talk about this is a big club and we're not in it. Well, we've been reporting on the club and the videos over the last 5 years. We can put the club together in video and in writing, and we've really been the only people talking about private judges. And private judging is when attorneys convince their clients to use another attorney or a retired judge to be the judge in their case, instead of a public court judge, instead of a judge who was elected or appointed to the bench. And these attorneys could tell their clients to use a retired judge. And that would be a little bit better, because a retired judge has at least had training and experience as a judge instead of an attorney who has not. And so retired judges at least understand bias, the law, how to apply the law. And so you might have a little bit better crack at a retired judge. And there are businesses that run private judge businesses, and they contract with attorneys and retired judges, and those businesses are known as ADR Services, Signature Resolutions, and Jams. So if you look back through my old videos, we've gone into Jams in LA, we've gone into I don't think we've been into signature resolutions, but we've gone into a lot of these businesses. I'm going to walk over here in the shade a little bit. And so these are businesses that are created, and let me tell you what these businesses can do. These businesses can get attorneys to feed them a steady stream of business through referrals. And when you come to those businesses, they can either put you into mediation, private judging, or arbitration. And arbitration is what we see in employment contracts, we see it in housing contracts, and arbitration is very secretive, like private judging, but worse. Arbitration is basically when you go to an arbitrator and your complaint is public, but nothing is public except the ruling. And so businesses that send a great deal of business to arbitrators typically get favorable rulings. Because if you're bringing a lot of business to somebody, and think about this in any other business, when you have good clients that are doing their job and or bringing you a lot of business, you're going to be nicer to those clients. You're going to make sure you provide them the services they need. You're going to make sure you get them recommending their friends, and you're going to build your business that way. So the big businesses recruit sitting public court judges, and they love family court judges because they bring them all the high asset divorce cases, but they also do things for civil cases. And civil cases are the ones that could go to a jury. So one of the things that is really alarming about private judging.
Jeez. I can see. I see.
There was a little accident right here in front of us, so now they're going to have an argument. I'll just.
Yeah, I have to be careful. You think I.
Oh, that was so not necessary.
Little distraction. So also these businesses do mediation, and attorneys do mediation, and anybody can be a mediator. Your local teacher, a firefighter, a journalist, anybody could be a mediator. And what a mediator does is they get all the parties involved in a lawsuit or a dispute, and they get them together and they see if they can't get them to settle. And probably about 99% of cases settle. And there's also laws that before you go to trial, you have to mediate your case. You have to try to settle it because it saves resources to do that. And so mediation is completely confidential. And the idea of it is, this lady is really honk happy. A little altercation going in the parking outside the courthouse. She's very upset about anybody parking in front of her. And so in mediation, they keep it confidential. And the reason they keep it confidential is you want people to get all their grievances out. And there may be things that are prejudicial. So a mediator can't also be the judge in a case because you're hearing all the dirt, all the things that might not be in evidence. And when we get to juries or just a judge hearing a case, which is the case in family court, there are small claims cases, those don't have juries. Unlawful detainers don't have juries, so very few cases have juries. And so when you get to one of those cases, it's really important what the jury hears. So there's a big process and it takes years. This case has taken 5 years against Mark Erickson. So in 5 years, Mark Erickson has kept representing other divorce clients. We've had a lot of complaints. We've had a lot of people try to sue him for malpractice, and they weren't able to do it because they had missed the statute of limitations or they couldn't find an attorney to do it. So malpractice cases are very rare, and even more rare is the fraud claim against your attorney. And a fraud claim against an attorney means that you're saying that your own attorney that you paid money to has committed fraud, has deceived you, has done something wrong. And that's what's going on in this case inside this courthouse right now. They are alleging that the husband's attorney, who was Mark Erickson, colluded or coordinated their efforts in the case with the wife's attorney, who was David Patton. So I have written about this in the Davis Vanguard. The Daily Journal, which is a legal newspaper, published an article about it on July 25th. And overall, if you watch this channel or you read my work, you know I report a lot on private judging. And so what happened in this divorce case was, this was a second divorce for both Mr. Garcia and Miss Lopez. And Mr. Garcia went to Mark Erickson and he suspected his wife of gold digger-like activities, trying to get his real estate that was his separate property. And he's an empathetic litigant because he's 81 years old, which is elderly. He lost his mother when he was 7, so he grew up without having close contact with or influence of a mother, which is very important. It's a risk factor in life. He lost his son to a motorcycle accident at 19, and he lost his daughter to ovarian cancer, and his grandchildren moved out of the area and with their dad, and he hasn't really had contact with them. So he's not had a charmed life. And when he married Mary, he started to pay for her grandchildren's activities. They bought this house in Almaden Valley and were going to fix it up, and that's where they were going to live. And he was in his mid-70s at the time. And for people in their mid-70s and who aren't married, they can be lonely and they need companionship. And so he married Mary Lopez. And there was a series of prenuptial agreements where they each identified their separate property and said they were getting married, but they each wanted their property protected. So when Richard went to Mark Erickson, he told him all of these issues, that he was concerned about Mary. He also told him about the gold coins and that Mary had been prone to trying to deceive her former in-laws out of their inheritance with this safe and all of that. And so it was interesting that for 5 years they've had depositions, and also people are unaware of what these cases cost. And rarely will you find an attorney willing to do these cases for free. They take 5 years of your life, and so it's a more of a commitment than going to college. And you have to do depositions, you do discovery, and you do a lot of work over the 5 years that costs money, and you have to keep paying your attorney to do that. By the way, I can't read your comments right now because of the light, and I'm trying to not jiggle my camera, and I cannot get it in the horizontal shooting mode, so I'm going to just keep doing this, and then I'm going to read your comments later, because we're going to go for a while, because they're on a break until 10:30 when the jury is getting seated. So I want to tell you what happened in the first hour of this trial, because you're not going to read about it in the newspaper, you're not going to hear about it anywhere else, but this is how the private judging industry is protecting itself. So last week, the attorneys, there are 2 attorneys for Mark Erickson. One is Brad Benning and one is Bruce McLeod. And these 2 attorneys are very well connected here. One of them, Bruce Benning, is actually a private judge and mediator himself who works for a business known as ADR Services, which is like Jams. And so these 2 attorneys filed what we call a motion in limine, and that's spelled INLIME, motion in limine. And the dirtiest things in a trial always happen in motions in limine and what happens before a jury comes in. Because once a jury is seated, everything that happens in that courtroom is part of the record. There's a court reporter taking the record down, and the jury gets to see the evidence that the judge allows in, and then the attorneys do their job to try to convince the jury of their side of the argument. So a motion in limine is when you ask the judge to exclude certain evidence. And it was interesting that right before this, and it always happens right before the trial, it can happen orally. An attorney can make an oral argument for a motion in limine, which we understand happened in there today. And one of the oral arguments was the attorneys for Mark Erickson, Brad Benning and Bruce McLeod, had filed a motion and put in evidence at the last minute that they were going to try to disparage the other attorneys in the case that had come after Mark Erickson. So they were going to try to make his other attorneys look bad to mitigate some of the harm that Mark Erickson had done. We're going to move Puppy in the shade. And so that really isn't relevant what happened after when the attorneys tried to clean up what Mark Erickson had done. But that was part of their defense. They were going to try to make other attorneys look bad. And the judge denied that motion in limine. But also the judges, the attorneys for Mark Erickson filed a motion in limine to exclude anybody saying anything disparaging about private judging. And in particular, they used a quote from one of my articles. They didn't put the article in, but it was an article about private judging. And they referenced the Daily Journal. And the Daily Journal is a newspaper that is subscription only, so you can't just find it on the street. They don't have it in news racks where you can put $1 in and get the newspaper. And a few years ago, I found out in this courthouse, when I was going in this civil courthouse, that taxpayers pay for judges to get a subscription to the Daily Journal. And it's all about lawyers, it's all about judges, it's about verdicts, it's about settlements, it's about how much you get in a civil rights case, and it's information that we just don't get as the general public. And in order to get the Daily Journal, I can't remember how much the court was paying, but at the time it was a lot of money. They were paying tens of thousands of dollars a year for subscriptions to the Daily Journal. And then the Daily Journal gets advertising dollars from attorneys and private judges and big private judging businesses like Chams. So the Daily Journal wrote an article about this case, and they published it on July 25th, 2025. So yesterday, I went with the litigant down to the courthouse because I emailed the reporter in the Daily Journal, and I asked him if he could give us the article, and he didn't respond to me at all, which, you know, that's a slight. That's something that journalists do to each other, because journalists are competing for stories and information and sources. And so he didn't want to give me that information. So that was fine. But how do you get access to the Daily Journal articles if you don't have a large law firm paying for a subscription? You have to be a judge, and you can have taxpayers pay for it in that courthouse. Or you can go to the local law library. So that's what I did yesterday, and I had Richard read the article, and I'll be posting that later today. But they cited that article and my work as a reason to not allow a jury to hear about private judging. They don't want a jury to know about the bad parts of what can happen with private judging. And there's nothing in the public domain about private judging except what we've done or AI's picked up. And so for a divorce litigant who is told by their attorney that private judging is going to be cheaper, faster, and more confidential, they believe their attorney. They're paying an attorney $400, $500, $600, in some cases $1,200 an hour. So why would you not believe your attorney? And so in this case, Mark Erickson picked Michael Smith. And if you remember, I remixed the video that we had done at Michael Smith's office trying to get records related to his private judge cases. And when we did that, I put it up on Sunday. And then I wrote an article on Monday about this case. And so the motion in limine this morning was Mark Erickson's attorneys, one of which is a private judge and mediator working for ADR Services, and his name is Brad Benning. They were asking the judge to order that the jury not hear anything disparaging about private judging. And so a little bird told me that the judge granted that request. So it will be interesting to see what the jury is going to be able to hear about private judging. And we're going to start talking about it everywhere we can, because the fact that the public doesn't know what private judging is, and that these divorce attorneys that are using private judging to do nefarious things to their own clients means that we have to start educating everybody about private judging and how it affects everybody and the harm that it can cause. This case is probably the first of all the cases where an attorney is being sued in connection with putting his client into private judging. That isn't all he did, but he did other bad things, and he did it for the benefit of the former wife and her attorneys. And you will hear people say, oh, my own attorney threw me under the bus. As a public defender, if you're going through a criminal trial, say you get a DUI or disturbing the peace, and you have to hire a public defender or even a criminal defense attorney, the equivalent would be just simply sitting down and not giving you a defense, not objecting to the prosecutor trying to keep things out of evidence. And so the attorney for Mr. Garcia did make objections and filed those objections yesterday, and the judge denied him. And so the judge is working a little bit overtime to prevent this jury from hearing what private judging is doing. So if we don't have newspapers reporting on private judging, unless they're newspapers that only lawyers and judges read, and we don't have juries hearing about private judging, we really just don't have any way of expressing to the public, other than this platform and the writing that I do, to explain private judging. So I'm going to explain how the court papers describe how Mark Erickson got his client into private judging, because this is something we hear from everybody. What he did was he first told him it would be cheaper and faster than going to public court. And that was in 2016. And as of this year, 2025, Richard was still not divorced. So Mark Erickson got Richard to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in attorney's fees, private judge fees, transcripts, court reporter fees, and he's still not divorced. His divorce is going to go to trial in that courthouse right behind me, the family courthouse, in September. But his trial against his attorney, where he is asking for over $2 million plus punitive damages because he's elderly and he's suffered a lot of damages, is going on in the civil courthouse, where a jury will hear the causes of action and decide whether or not Richard is entitled to money from his former attorney. So Richard is contending that he lost $1 million based on Mark Erickson not objecting to his separate property being moved into this Almaden property. And he's also claiming $500,000, which he has to pay his ex-wife's attorneys. And that's David Patent. So remember, at the beginning of this lawsuit, Mark Erickson said that, or Richard has said, that Mark Erickson was colluding with the wife's attorneys. Well, if your actions result in your wife's attorneys getting $500,000 because of the private judge, that's kind of a problem. So the other thing is, when Mark Erickson put Richard in private judging, he only gave him one name. And Richard said, well, how do I check the references? So think about this in terms of, you're going to use a private judge who's going to be in charge of all of your financial decisions in your life, your income, your financial decisions, your home, your properties, everything. And Mark Erickson doesn't tell him he could have gone to jams or used a retired judge. He didn't tell him all the attorneys that do this. And he also didn't tell him any way to investigate the private judge. So Richard went down to the law library and he couldn't find anything on private judges. And so yesterday I went with Richard to the law library. We had him read the Daily Journal article, and we also had him look again for private judge profiles, which there weren't any. And we also had him look for the profile for the judge in this case, and he read it out loud. So now we know some background on the judge that just denied the motion, or granted the motion, so that a jury will not be hearing anything disparaging about private judging. I'm going to let that motorcycle go in a minute. I think this is an attorney over here. The attorneys and the sheriffs have all been very interested in me being out here. Only I did think I saw Brad Benning coming out of the courthouse, and I recorded him, and I recorded what they were talking about on the sidewalk. And so I'm going to post that in a video a little bit later when I confirm that that's who it was with the people that were inside the courtroom. So there's a reporter in the courtroom. The two sides are in the courtroom, and the judge is Judge Sabin. And Judge Sabin's profile was read yesterday by Richard, and I said, do you think she can be fair based on that profile? And what's interesting about judicial profiles, private judges don't typically have them unless they work for those big businesses. But judge profiles tell us a little bit about the background of the judge. And very few attorneys or other people take the time to go and look those profiles up. But at the end of the profile is a statement about cases that the judge is proud of and the attorneys that have appeared before them. And so if you go to the law library and you look up your judge, you will often see them talk about marriage of divorce, these divorce cases, and the attorneys that were in front of them. And that's the way that the judge is giving the attorneys a little attaboy and prop. Judge Sabin didn't have any of these attorneys in the case, so there was really nothing to object to. But it was interesting that Judge Sabin has her profile published by the Daily Journal. Their Daily Journal article was published claiming that private judging might not be such a good idea in their headline. They wrote a headline about that, and I posted about that. And so I'm going to have Richard's video of him reading that article posted later tonight. But the judge granted Mark Erickson's attorney's motion so that a jury's not going to hear anything bad about private judging. And private judging doesn't have to be bad, but when attorneys are doing it and not retired judges, we see a lot of problems. And the private judges that I've had the most complaints about are Michael Smith, who was the private judge in Mark Erickson's malpractice case, James Cox, who used to work as a settlement officer for the court, family court, when it was the old courthouse, Commissioner Schroeder, who became a private judge, Erwin Joseph, and there's some ripe stories about Erwin Joseph. One of them was the attorneys told one woman, hey, you can use Erwin Joseph as a private judge, it'll be cheaper. And she had a couple of rental properties, and they said all you have to do is give him one of your properties and he won't charge you up front. And so that and other statements has made us aware that this whole private judging legal scheme that is legally authorized has effectively been called bribery, because you're paying a judge to decide issues in your case. And you're not allowed to pay a judge under Penal Code Section 94, and I wrote about that. So how can we allow private judging to exist where you're paying a judge? And the attorneys, the divorce attorneys, never tell you that you don't need to use another attorney to be your private judge. You could, in fact, use anybody. You don't have to pay them. You could use somebody charging $5 an hour instead of $600 an hour. So those are the kinds of issues that we see in private judging, but more importantly, we see private judges just simply rigging cases. They're just already deciding the outcome the moment the attorneys bring them a case. And that is what there is an appearance of happened in Richard's divorce case, because he lost everything, his wife won everything, and the other lawyers, David Patton and his firm, not only got paid by Richard's ex-wife during the divorce, but they're now going to get paid $500,000 out of the sale of the community residence. So the community residence is located in Almaden Valley. It's what the attorneys fight over. They don't fight over, they grab the money they can from the bank accounts because they get you to pay them. You've got to pay them to keep all this going. But really, the eye of the attorneys in all these private judge cases is on the real estate. And that can be the family home, it can be rentals, it can be any of that. And Mark Erickson represented a lot of the women that I reported on related to this nonprofit Women SV, a lot of them. And he ended up getting them sanctioned. There was an appearance that he was throwing cases for the benefit of the other attorneys. And a lot of times when I read your comments or people comment on our articles, they'll say, yeah, the wife always wins or the husband always wins, and it really doesn't have anything to do with gender, it doesn't have anything to do with race or culture. It is simply the attorneys making the money out of these cases. So private judging is a legally authorized scheme in California. It doesn't exist in all other states. And this morning, Judge Sabin in this civil courthouse ruled that a jury is not going to be able to hear anything disparaging about private judging. That means you can't express your opinions about it being bad. You can't get information out about whether it's good or bad. There's no online reviews. There's no news articles. All there is this and the article that the Daily Journal wrote that you can't get access to unless you pay for a subscription. So we've got to keep talking about private judging and when it might be appropriate and when it would not. And I'm going to go over the things that I've seen in these private judge stipulations and how a private judge comes to be. So what happens is the attorneys say, hey, I think it'll be cheaper and faster for you to use a private judge. And so when you agree, there's a stipulation because the court can't force you to use a private judge. You have to do it yourself. And you give up the right to go to a public court judge the moment you agree to that. If you don't agree to it, then the attorneys send little signals to the judges that you were bad or not cooperative by not agreeing to do that. So you start to hear the peer pressure. And the judges that are working in the public courthouses only make about $220,000 a year. They make less than their bailiffs. And so for a public court judge that's going to retire, they're not even making living wages in Silicon Valley. The promise of going into private judging is a big one. And I have judge sources that told me that it feels like judges are trying out for private judging on the bench. And the way that you try out for being a private judge is you give favorable orders to the attorneys who are likely to bring you business as a private judge. And there is an optic that Judge Sabin, who's in that civil courthouse, may just have done that because a private judge, mediator, arbitrator, Brad Benning, brought a motion that a jury could not hear anything disparaging about private judging, and she granted that motion. So Richard, I don't know how the trial is going to go, but effectively that means that if one of the attorneys brings something up or elicits the testimony disparaging private judging, they could arguably be held in contempt and go to jail. So you could be jailed for talking negatively about private judging in the presence of a jury. And that's how important that motion in limine was this morning. And that's why when you cover a trial from the beginning to the end, which is what we have done in this case, we started covering it when it was filed, we wrote about it, and then we have followed how it happens, the costs of it. And so that's what I want to go over now during the 5 years. Because everyone always says, if you look in my comments, whenever we show you this, everyone always says, sue, sue. Well, we're going to talk about what it costs to sue and why people just don't and can't do it. First of all, you can't sue a private judge. You can, but it's going to get thrown out because private judges, more than police officers, have immunity. They have absolute immunity for everything they do. So if you agree and you pay a private judge and they do horrible things to you, steal your property, act grossly unfair, don't follow any of the rules, there's nothing you can do about it. You can't sue them, or you can't win if you sue them. You can't get monetary damages out of them. You can't even get back the money that you paid them. And we know that Michael Smith was cashing in cryptocurrency. If you look at my last videos, the attorneys will do everything to get the private judge paid because they have immunity. So the only thing you can do is you can sue your attorney, which is what Richard did. He sued Mark Erickson. It has taken 5 years. Richard is 81 years old, and he's lived through health problems and everything else, so it's a miracle that he's still alive. And there is a feeling that he has expressed that he really thought that Mark Erickson and David Patton and his wife just thought that he would die. And if he died, then his wife would have gotten everything and the attorneys would have all gotten paid anyway. Instead, Mark Erickson's malpractice carrier is having to defend him in this case. So the malpractice carrier, let's talk about malpractice insurance. Attorneys have malpractice insurance, and that means if they commit malpractice, and malpractice is for a doctor, if the doctor is supposed to do surgery on your left arm and they cut off your right arm, they've committed malpractice. And so attorneys, when they commit malpractice, it means that they provide below the standard of care and they are negligent and they have to pay for the damage that they caused. Well, this is a malpractice case, but it's also a fraud case. And so the attorney in the case has to prove fraud. And the jury has to hear enough evidence to be able to make a finding of fraud. And if you make a finding of fraud, then Richard would be entitled to punitive damages. And those aren't just the actual damages like the court costs and the attorney's fees and the private judge fees. Those are damages that he was caused as a result of the attorney being negligent. So over 5 years, Mark Erickson has been deposed. Richard has been deposed. They've had to hire experts that typically cost $20,000 to $30,000. And Mark Erickson has a malpractice insurance company paying for all of this, so it's not coming out of his pocket. He just keeps working and representing people in that courthouse over there, earning income, whereas Richard has to pay an attorney and all of those costs. The other costs, depositions, you can either do it so that there's a court reporter present to keep it, and it's as if the person had appeared as a witness in court, or you can pay a video deposition, and I know Richard had some of those done. We saw some of those video depositions, and so now a jury is going to hear the evidence, and I'm not quite sure how the attorney will present the harm that Mark Erickson did without being able to talk about the negative aspect of private judging. So we're going to be interested to see that. Also, over the 5 years, it's a lot of wait and hurry up. And something that people don't usually know about is in civil cases, there is a rule that it has to be completed within 5 years. So riddle me how divorce cases like Richard's happening in that courthouse can take 10. There's a carve out that if you go to mediation or alternate resolution like private judging, it stops the clock in your divorce case. And so attorneys will throw you into mediation or private judging to stop the clock on the case so that they can continue to litigate it longer than 5 years. So Richard has had to pay court reporters. I followed him yesterday going to pay the court reporter for this case. And let me tell you what a court reporter costs for this case. So when Richard's divorce started, the court was providing court reporters in every single family law case. And what would happen is you would pay $90 to file a motion, and $30 of that went to pay for a court reporter. And they've now eliminated court reporters. They say they have electronic recordings in the family courthouse, but so far we aren't finding people able to get those electronic recordings, even when they say they exist. They deny our media requests and they don't allow photographing. So if you don't have a court reporter, then you can't appeal a decision of a judge, which could be illegal, unconstitutional, and you can't take an appeal. So the judges benefit from no court reporters in the courtroom because their orders aren't going to be overturned. And if an order isn't overturned, it stays in place forever. That's it. If the judge has made the law, that's an order, you break it and you don't pay, that you could be held in contempt or you could go to jail. So now Richard is in civil court where they don't provide court reporters, and the cost on a court reporter is $2,200 a day. And that doesn't include the transcript that you could pay a couple hundred to $1,000 for as well. So the court reporters are making that money. There are no cameras in the courtrooms. There are no reporters in the courtrooms, and we have one in there right now. And the juries are not able to hear the evidence that you guys can hear out here on a public sidewalk with puppies sleeping on the job. So that is what it took to get this malpractice case to a jury. And we are out here going to follow it. I'm going to be doing videos. And I want to talk about the schedule for this too, because this is, and then I'm going to try to read some of your comments. The schedule is that they go to trial today. They argued the motions in limine in the morning. the jury is now being seated. So that means that the attorneys are asking the jury questions, and they're deciding the jurors that they want. So in addition to motions in limine being the most important thing before a trial, jury selection is probably the most, because it's like picking your judge. It's like making sure that you have someone sitting on the jury who is going to be one of your peers and not a peer of the attorney who's on trial, and all his peers are in the courtroom, the judge, the other attorneys, the expert witnesses who are lawyers. And so jury selection will be very important. And tonight, in tonight's video, I will give an update about the jury and who we don't reveal names of jurors or photograph jurors, because we don't want them to feel intimidated and that they can't freely make their decisions. But the types of people who are selected as jurors are really important. And that brings me to when I was on a jury in a DUI case. And I got to watch how the public defender and how the prosecutor selected jurors. And the public defender didn't want police officers or anybody who had been married to a police officer, and they didn't want lawyers. There was somebody's mother who had sent their child to school, and their child had become a lawyer, and she disclosed that, and she got thrown off the jury. And so how lawyers pick juries are really important as well. And you get so many strikes on a jury. They call them preemptory challenges. And you get so many, just like you get a preemptory challenge on a judge. And after you're out of those, you're just stuck with the jury that you get seated. So another motion in limine can be about what kinds of questions or what kind of jurors that you can have. So that's what we're going to cover. We're going to be down here at the courthouse, and here's the days of the trial. Today is jury selection, the motion in limine, and then after lunch, I believe the plaintiff, who is Richard, will be the first one up to bat. And the next witness is going to be Mark Erickson. And then they go on break because the judge had a conflict, and so they're going to go on break, and they're going to come back next week for 2 days before the Labor Day weekend. And then if they're not finished, they're going to make the jury come back again. So from the standpoint of the plaintiff, that's a really bad jury schedule. And the reason that's a bad jury schedule is because the jury is interrupted. They're disrupted from hearing what's going on. And so when they hear evidence, they are then going to go on their Labor Day weekend. They're going to go away for the weekend. They have to go back to work and work for a few days. And then they come back and hear more evidence. So it's very chopped up the way, and it really is, it feels as if the judge is working more against the plaintiff in this case than the defendant, who happens to be a lawyer. And that is what we call hometowning. That's a legal term that lawyers are familiar with, and that's when the judge is doing a solid for the defendant or the lawyers in the case. And that's what the private judge was doing in Richard's case, but now we have this happening here. So the way that judges can be biased against you or favor the other side so that it influences outcomes is they can allow jurors they know that are going to be more favorable to one side. They can overrule objections made by one side and sustain objections, meaning they can, when an attorney objects to evidence or an attorney objects to certain testimony, the judge might allow certain testimony that is going to benefit one side. So those are all the things that can happen. And so for everybody who thinks that getting your day in court is going to bring justice, it's a long way from justice. And there's a lot of flaws in our legal system, whether you're sitting in a civil courthouse with a jury or you're sitting in a criminal courthouse. So we're going to continue to follow this, and it's going to be a little choppy. And in between, I'm going to write some articles, and I'm going to I'm going to do some videos to bring you all up to speed, because win or lose, this is the first case that we know of where an attorney is being held to account. And I want to be clear, if Mark Erickson loses this case, Mark Erickson isn't going to be bankrupted because his insurance is going to pay it. It's like having homeowners insurance. If your home burns down, you're going to lose some of the personal effects that might be sentimental. You're going to lose some, maybe not get back everything that you lost in your house, but you're going to be pretty okay. You're going to be able to build a new house and you're going to keep going. And so that's what's going to happen to Mark Erickson if he loses. If Richard loses, he loses the money that all the attorneys already caused him to lose, and he won't have any way to get that back. He will be paying David Patton's law firm $500,000. He won't get $1 million of his separate property out of the Almaden house, and that was all set up from the beginning. So that's how our legal system really works. And while I had hoped that Judge Sabin would be fair, and Richard had read her profile and read the article in the Daily Journal yesterday and thought it was all fair, the legal system has a lot of kinks in it, and the individuals that are working in it are often responsible for kinking things up. So let's put our glasses back on, and if anyone has any question, I can see your questions right now. Yes, Ryan Holzinger, our legal system is definitely broken. And, you know, the fact that you have to pay all the money, Johnny Bravo, appreciate having you here. The fact that we have to pay all this money to sue a divorce attorney that you already paid, and that the legal system just works against us the whole time, is really a problem. Katie, thank you for the comment. I appreciate it. I really just try to make sure that you're all educated so that you don't sign up for a private judge. You don't overpay a divorce attorney that's going to do what Mark Erickson did. And I'm going to focus a little bit on Brad Benning, the attorney who brought the motion. And I want to talk about Brad Benning a little bit. Brad Benning is actually, I got public records a while ago and found out that he was acting as a referee. So a private judge is appointed in California under CCP 638, and a referee is appointed under 639. And let me explain the difference. A private judge has immunity, only answers to themselves. Nobody is responsible for managing and supervising them, and they get to do whatever they want. And that's really dangerous to allow that, someone with immunity to do that. A referee is supposed to be managed and supervised by the court. And a referee can be used to handle complex discovery. So say you have a case where there's just thousands of pages of discovery. A court will sometimes appoint an attorney as a referee, and that attorney will usher in the discovery and figure out the best way to handle it. And they do it outside of the court, so they don't have to use court resources. Brad Benning has been a referee. I'm looking into whether he's been a private judge or not, but he works for ADR Services. And so he is a private judge, and the optic on him coming to court and asking that a jury not hear anything negative almost seems like unfair business practices and protection for private judges, which he is one. So that bothers me a little bit. And I did go to his office yesterday. They were very nice. The staff was very nice, by the way, gave treats to Puppy, gave her toys. And I left him a note and I gave him an opportunity to comment, because remember, journalism is about getting both sides of the story. And that's why when we cover it, we try to explain what each side is doing. Somebody just asked, are there any good attorneys that I can highlight? I could, except for some of them are my sources, and I don't want them to face retaliation. So if anybody ever asks me privately about private judges or private judging, who's good, who's bad, I am happy to kind of give you some information. There was somebody in LA, I want to give him a shout out. Somebody in LA sent me a little support for some of my work, and I spent some time talking to him about what was going on in LA. And we talked about the attorneys, and I did contact some of my attorney sources down there, and I got some names for him that, you know, it's the best option that I could get. With Mark Erickson, I have known so many people to just really be burned by him. They haven't said bad things about his son, Matt, but the apple may not fall too far from the tree, and they have an associate, Jean Nishimura. I don't know if she's still there, but I know that she's in there. If you want to write to me, Claudia, my email is gilroybassy@gmail.com. And that's Gilroy like the city, and then my last name, Bassi, @gmail. But if your email is long and is going to take a lot of my trying to sort it out, it's probably not going to, I'm not going to be able to read it and respond. So if you do email me one issue that you think I can do something about. I understand the trauma of the legal system, and for Ian, who just said, I like your dog. And yeah, she's with me every time. She's 16 and she's a little tired right now because she worked all day yesterday at Brad Benning's office. But she's always with me, and I use her because she is comforting to a lot of people, and she's very neutralizing too. And so I find her very helpful with my work. Yeah, Johnny, it was impressive. She was 16 on Sunday, so I did a little birthday for her on Monday morning at the beach. And she got a birthday dinner. I want to thank the Thai people. There was a Thai restaurant, which was the only restaurant open on Sunday night by the time I stopped working, and they gave her a chicken dish for her birthday, and they comped us for that, so we appreciated that. So if you email me, please put in the subject line what you want to email me about. Do not send me all the details about your case. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a therapist. I am trying to educate you. And if you are at a spot in your life where your divorce attorney or a civil attorney is telling you you need to use a private judge, I want you to think about it. If you have an attorney who is not issuing subpoenas, who is not getting discovery, who is not doing anything other than fake fighting with the other side in emails and continuing hearings over and over again, you're probably in the bad part of the system. What is a good attorney? A good attorney is one who wants to keep you out of court. And I'm going to say that over and over and over again. And if you ever do hire an attorney and you're in a situation where you can pay $500 an hour, you need to hold your attorney accountable. Don't sign a fee agreement that requires you to go to arbitration if you have a dispute with your attorney, because that's just attorneys covering up what they're doing and keeping you out of court. Don't sign that. You don't have to. And if attorneys are making you sign that, you need to ask why. Claudia, my email is gilroybassy, my last name, @gmail.com, and you can find it in some posts. So that would be the first thing that I would say. Look at your attorney's retainer agreement. The other thing is check out your attorney. And that doesn't mean going to Yelp reviews or Avo. So many of you tell me, oh, I went to Avo and they said he was a great attorney. Avo is an attorney-sponsored and paid advertising for attorneys. So if attorneys are telling you they're great, that isn't a review. You need to talk to people, and one good way, this is the very best way to check out an attorney. Go to the court. Find out other cases that attorney has had and call up their clients and say, how did that go? And if you see an attorney is being replaced by attorneys over and over and over again, so one side has a lot of attorneys, that means all those attorneys are probably not able to handle the case, or they're throwing their own clients under the bus and just taking $5,000, $10,000 along the way. And then what you will hear when you go to court is the attorney that's been in the case the entire time, who is the winning attorney, they will say, oh, look how many attorneys that other side has had, as if that's something that you are personally responsible for. And the other thing is, as soon as a judge knows that attorneys are not being paid, there is this shaming that goes on that's really kind of, I've seen it in court over and over again, and I know how hard you guys are working. I see you emptying your kids' college accounts and your retirement accounts and selling off properties. By the way, Richard is going to sell silver coins that he's been hawking them for a low price, but he is having to sell silver coins from 2015 to pay his litigation costs, and he's selling off his silver coins. And so for each one of those coins, I'm going to tell a story that happened in 2015 because he has silver coins from 2015 of Queen Elizabeth II or something. It's all silver. I don't know anything about silver coins, but and I find that that's the kind of thing that I hear you guys are doing. You're selling off your real estate, you're bankrupting yourselves, all to keep these attorneys going. And I know that people that have a lot of money may just do that and see it as a cost of doing business. They don't mind if they use the court system against their spouse. But for the middle class families, it really does always shock me how it doesn't take two to fight. It only takes one willing to fund the right lawyer, and the lawyers do the fights. So, and the courts will continue and drag it out because every time they do, the attorneys are all just making more money. So, check the retainer agreement, don't sign binding arbitration. And I'm going to say this about private judging because I did have a mediation with Jams when I had a business. And private judging and mediation, I think mediation should be first and foremost and the only thing that happens in divorces. Because in mediation, you don't come out unless you agree, unless you both agree to something, which means you both have to give and take. And if you ever go into any court proceeding thinking you are 100% right, then you've already lost. The moment you walk in courthouse doors, you've probably lost. So I would say find attorneys whose records aren't in the courthouse, whose records are in mediation and settling agreements. And if you find an attorney who is settling all these cases, it's not always the clients that are easy to get along with. It's the attorneys that have the skill and the ability to settle a case. But when they settle a case, they may only make $5,000 or $10,000. And so attorneys are lazy, attorneys are incompetent most of the time. And so they want to keep the litigation going, and you're just paying them for emails, you're paying them to continue court hearings, you're paying for them to ask for extensions, and all of that is costing you money and making them money. So look at your attorneys, the background for that. And then the other thing that I would say is look at the staff. And you don't just want a staff that is competent, but you want them to be somewhat empathetic and feel like that the attorney you hire has hired somebody decent that they're managing and supervising. And that brings to mind the Erickson case, because Mark Erickson had a paralegal by the name of Lisa Morey, M-O-R-I. And Lisa Morey worked for Richard and was paid by Richard, and then went to work for the law firm of his wife, David Patent. And that in itself has a very bad optic because they pass these paralegals around, and we've seen attorneys disqualified for that very conduct, but it took hundreds of thousands of dollars to disqualify an attorney in the case. So the next thing I want to say is, when you all contact me complaining about your former spouse's attorney, that means that attorney is probably doing their job, because their job is to give a zealous representation to their client. It's not to be fair to you, it's to give a zealous representation. So when you file a bar complaint against your former spouse's attorney, the bar isn't going to do anything about it. And it goes nowhere. Attorneys are not afraid of those kind of complaints. I don't know if a bar complaint was filed against Mark Erickson. If it wasn't, it should have been, because in the last 5 years, they had more than enough reasons to do that. It would protect the public from Mark Erickson doing what he did to Richard and all the other women that I know that he did really terrible things to in the name of being an attorney. But the bar overall, and if you watch Father in Exile's channel, he gets a little colorful, but you'll find out quickly that the bar doesn't do anything against these attorneys. And the number one case that we know about was the case involving Thomas Girardi down in LA. And he was married to Erica Jane of the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. And Thomas Girardi had over 200 complaints against him that the state bar just ignored. And then when he finally got, I think a law firm out of Chicago sued him when he got into a divorce and everything came out about what he had done, He was eventually criminally convicted. He's supposedly in one of those white-collar, cushy federal prisons, and all the money that he stole, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And Thomas Girardi was the attorney in the Aaron Brockovich movie that we were all cheering for. Aaron Brockovich getting those records and saving the poor cancer patients. And they started with an attorney who didn't have a lot of money, and he needed help with the litigation. And so they went to Thomas Girardi's firm. And Thomas Girardi ended up stealing all the money that he got in settlements and that kind of thing. So that is the real life of what we see in the movies. And so if you have watched movies and read books about the legal system, I love John Grisham movies. I love listening to his audiobooks. But, you know, when you get to court, you realize that it doesn't work the way that we see in the movies, and there is just absolutely nothing about how the courts work that we're aware of, because the newspapers don't cover it. They cover the arrests, they cover the outcomes, they cover the big jury trials and the awards, but they don't cover everything in between. Somebody mentioned the 8.3 rule needs a champion rat. So rule 8.3 is a snitch rule. And it's a rule that says that if attorneys know another attorney is engaged in misconduct or being unethical or doing unconstitutional things, here, I think we have police officers out there circling. I've been watching them this morning because they've been very interested in what I'm doing out here. So they just came with their ticket book. I wonder if I have a ticket. We'll see. And I'm going to go back and put more money in the meter in a second. But so that's roughly what's going on in this trial. I try to explain to you guys things about attorneys. Private judges are appointed attorneys that act as judges, and that is similar to minors' counsel that we talk about. And it's interesting that they have sheriff's deputies, 2 of them out there writing tickets. Because a minute ago they had one of those community service officers out here. And sheriff's deputies around here make about $200,000 or $300,000 a year, and they are contracted to provide security to the courthouse. So I do find that a little bit interesting over there. They also keep waving to me when they're aware that we are watching them. Let me see if I can zoom in on them a little bit. Here we go. You know, remember those old jokes about light bulbs? How many did it take to screw in a light bulb? I do wonder how many sheriff's deputies it takes to write one of these tickets. Zoom a little bit more. Want me to go over there and ask them their name and badge numbers? Because I'd like to look up how much they're making to write tickets. I think I can get a little more zoomy. Here we go. Okay, now I'm going to flip it around. Let me see if I can do that and go up. Yeah, I'm going to flip it around. They're taking pictures of that license plate. Very interested in that car. And they had what looked like a ticket book out here. Okay, so I'm going to keep it flipped around a little bit. You're going to get tired of looking at me. Whoever just said, no, I did not finish explaining the snitch rule. Okay, so I'm going back to explaining the snitch rule, and Peppy and I are going to go cross the street and feed the meter. So the snitch rule is rule 8.3, and it is a state bar rule that went into effect after they caught Thomas Girardi stealing not just a little bit of money, but millions of dollars. And the story was written in the daily, in the Los Angeles Times, and it was really very scandalous. I think it was on American Greed, but I'm really shocked there hasn't been more about it in mainstream media, because Thomas Girardi was collecting all this money from fire victims, the PG&E fires. He was collecting the money from insurance settlements, so people who had died of cancer or who were widowed from plane accidents. And he was getting hundreds of millions of dollars, and he was just stealing it. He was just keeping his law practice going. He was donating to a lot of politicians. There was something about that he tended to donate to primarily the Democrats in California. He was very well connected. He had a restaurant that everybody went and supported in LA, and it was really very scandalous. But the most scandalous was that there was this state bar investigator by the name of Ben Charney. Not Ben Charney, that was the one that did all the ones here. I can't remember the name of that state bar investigator. But the state bar investigator, Girardi was flying him around on private planes, getting jobs for his son. And, but the most scandalous, you ready for this one, was when the LA Times reported on Girardi's secretary. The FBI was starting to look at him only because a civil lawsuit had been brought. And the FBI agent that was assigned to the case in LA was actually the son of the former secretary of Girardi, who had gotten a house up in Carmel Valley. And so we pulled the records on that house, and that house literally involved the FBI agent in charge of investigations for Girardi owned it. And so I pointed that out to the FBI, and the next morning he recused from the investigation. So really, I just am always mindful that this is always about real estate, which is why the Mark Erickson case is important. So the snitch rule came out of that case, and the state bar admitted to how corrupt it had been, how it had let Thomas Girardi influence their investigators, basically bribery and corruption, but nothing really ever happened from that, other than the snitch rule that says if you know an attorney is doing something wrong, then you're an attorney, you're supposed to turn them in and snitch on them. So how often do you think that's happening? And really, arguably, when Mark Erickson was doing all this wrong in his private judging cases, probably someone should have snitched on him, but nobody ever did because they're all doing it. So David Patton benefited from that case, and in each private judge case, the attorneys are benefiting, and that's why they're not snitching on each other. So somebody said, I had court on Monday for a drug baggie a cop picked up and charged me with. Meanwhile, the DA in media, I can't read that whole comment, but so I'm trying to see if anybody else has any questions. We've covered, what to look for. I am gonna go over right before I close down, because I know we've been on for a long time, but I'm gonna go over how you could possibly use a private judge well. If you agreed to use an attorney as a private judge, you should vet them. You should make sure that they are disclosing not just their conflicts with the attorneys in the case, but their financial conflicts, their social conflicts. You want to know about that judge. You want to know if it's an attorney about really kind of their biases that they might be prone to having just in life. And if you got disclosure, you also learned that you could limit the amount of time that you have the private judge in. So for instance, Richard didn't have that ability, and he also allowed the private judge to continue to bring business. The attorneys for his wife got to keep bringing him business and didn't have to disclose it. So they were basically bringing Michael Smith a lot more business, and while they were, then the attorneys just kept rolling Richard in the case. So you can limit a private judge, and you can say, we want you to do this case, you're going to do it in 2 or 3 hearings, you can't rule on X, Y, and Z, and you're going to be paid only this amount. We're not just going to give you a blank check to keep going as long as you want. and you're either going to get it done or you're not. And if they can't get it done and they can't settle it, then you shouldn't be using that private judge. And I think if more people made their attorneys not put them into arbitration agreements, held them accountable, made them do the discovery, wrote very public complaints on Yelp and otherwise, I do think that would change a little bit. And it really is divorce attorneys that are the worst. Criminal defense attorneys can sometimes be bad too, and we hear lots of stories about that. Joshua, we're in California. And so I think what we have learned is we can't rely on attorneys to snitch on each other. They're going to always protect each other. They don't make good private judges. And if you have an attorney not tell you that you don't have to use an attorney as a private judge, you should probably run. And if you do pick an attorney, a private judge, I would suggest you pick a retired judge that you have vetted their court cases in and that you're confident that they could be a good private judge. So, Joshua, we're in California, and I'm trying to just read. I think I did finish talking about the snitch rule. Joshua, you asked about the point of this live stream. We're talking about a malpractice case involving a divorce attorney. And Johnny Bravo is looking at my police officers here that are, I am going to go ask them their names and badge numbers. Hi, officers. I'm doing a live stream and you guys cropped up in it. I just want to get your names and badge numbers.
Deputy Montes.
Deputy.
4547.
And
Atkins.
and are you both contracted with the court for
Yes,
security?
We are.
Okay, so why are you out here writing tickets?
It's part of the security detail for the courts.
To write parking tickets?
It's not a parking ticket.
Oh.
It's a criminal citation.
Oh, it's a criminal citation. Okay, thanks. We were just all wondering what you guys were doing because it did look like parking tickets.
No.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Yeah, of course.
So, there, I answered your question about what they were doing. I didn't have my headphones unplugged, so hopefully you could hear that. They were writing criminal citations, not parking tickets. So that is, I think we've covered all of it. And yeah, Joshua is a little late to the party. So we tried to cover the attorneys, the private judges, the motions in limine. I didn't know what a motion in limine was, and I really do think motions in limine are probably the most important thing in a case. And I wish I could get reporters trained to read those because they are very important. And we're going to read the news article from the Daily Journal about this case, and we're going to talk about all the things Judge Sabin doesn't want that jury to hear outside on the public sidewalk until everybody understands the good, the bad, and the ugly of private judging and the divorce attorneys that put people into it. So that's it. It was a very long live stream, 72 minutes. I appreciate you all being here. While we were here, they were doing jury selection, and just watch my videos as they drop the rest of the week. Anybody have one last question I'm going to go through? Somebody said, babe, you need to chill and go to the gym. Okay. That's what all the attorneys do. Somebody asked about ADA law. I'm not getting into that. I did find somebody that was subpoenaed in an ADA case yesterday, and that was really interesting to me. Oh, let's talk about subpoenas one last time. When I said to you, watch your attorneys and see if they're doing subpoenas. So what a subpoena is, and you can issue them pro per. You just have to do it through the clerk's office. You have to go in there and you have to write up your subpoena and have the clerk issue it because it comes from the court, or it comes from an officer of the court, which is an attorney. So subpoenas can get you witnesses to court. They can get you information. They can get you records that you might not be able to get. They can get you body cams. I've seen a lot of attorneys recently getting body cam video footage that I can't get in public records. So that's another important use of subpoenas. So if you hire a divorce attorney and there is a criminal related case where there's body cams and your divorce attorney is not getting those body cams and police reports, fire your divorce attorney, because that's basic 101, and most of the time they either just don't bother with it or they don't pay attention. So the subpoenas are really important, and I look for attorneys that are doing that work, that are issuing subpoenas, that know how to do discovery, that know how to do depositions, and those are the cases that we like to follow. And the other attorneys that I tend to look for are attorneys who are settling cases. And again, you find that by going through, you go through the court dockets. And to Slopjaw Johnson and the uncontrollable explosive, what you said you have, that sounds like a condition about a divorce attorney who seems to have that whenever I'm out here recording on the sidewalk. So thank you everybody who's stuck with us watching today. I think I covered everything. It was my private judge word salad, and I will post this, and we will keep this up for a little while, but watch for our other videos and news articles. Okay, thanks you guys.